just that observation makes you think about what we're lacking today in terms of conversations with people and how we've lost the connection points when it comes to interacting with people and not just your device.
I don't think in 15 minutes you can go deep in any kind of conversation.
Everybody's looking for the easy way out. Everybody's looking for a quick win, a quick buck, right from the very early age. In a way, I've always been a little bit jealous of that because you have something to drive you. That makes all of the other decisions a lot easier because you have one sole focus. You have one thing that really, really pushes you through, you dream about.
You said, oh, we don't fit with the people of our age. And you mentioned like an identity crisis as well, like which nationality you are.
I didn't fit there. I tried to fit there. I tried to fit here. And at some point, you just give up because there's no point in fitting anywhere. That can be stressful. That can be hard to deal with. I don't think I would exchange my journey and my life so far, as heartbreaking or painful or hard or difficult or gloriously beautiful and vibrant and sunny it might have been in certain seasons, or tiny glimmers of this journey, because then I wouldn't be the person I am today. And I'm sure that you wouldn't be the person you are today if you hadn't gone through your whole trajectory.
Hey, Raleigh, why do you think this conversation we're going to have today is important?
Can I answer, or do I need to wait
Yeah,
for a dramatic
that's
pause?
no. Go ahead.
From my experience, any kind of conversation you listen to or carve the time out to listen to should hopefully leave you with something useful, or my personal favorite, a reframe, something that you've been looking at in a specific way, but you suddenly realize there is something else underneath the surface.
Interesting. And how do you usually perceive these in daily conversations?
That's a tough one because most daily conversations are usually very shallow, so you can't really go super deep in other topics like small talk. What are you supposed to talk about the weather? Unless it turns into a climate discussion. It's a little bit hard, but at the same time, just that observation makes you think about what we're lacking today in terms of conversations with people and how we've lost the connection points when it comes to interacting with people and not just your device.
It's so funny that you're touching this because I was earlier today. I was fiddling with LinkedIn, and then I saw one comment, one guy that I follow, and he was saying that he participated in a podcast that was like a 15 minutes podcast. And he was saying, I liked it. It's different, but I don't think in 15 minutes you can go deep in any kind of conversation.
I agree.
And then I was compelled to reply and say I couldn't agree more, because when I think about a podcast, I think about exploring some topics, and like we may be losing our humanity in some ways, in our human touch, because most of the time we are thinking about productivity, being efficient in every single minute of our lives. And that is like, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? Okay, next, what's in it for me? Which I translate a bit into TikTok brain.
It's also something that touches on the sales calls, though, like to bring it in a business aspect. Usually you'll get advice of the sort that the first call should be no more than 20 minutes. But by the time you actually say hello to the person and you don't rush the person into the conversation, the time will already be up. And I know there are a lot of efficient people out there, some of which we've learned from. And I know there are secret ways of making it work. But connection wise, if that's what you're trying to build, I find it hard to make, and I feel rushed and stressed. And I think this is where it really comes down to your personality and who you are, and knowing how you think about the world, how you see yourself fit into it, and how you operate as a person. Do you mind if I ask what made you change or become conscious of that? That would be a better question, I think.
Well, failing was probably the best teacher. Failing to a point that I became miserable in my work. It was stressful. I find it interesting the way that you're putting this, because I know what you do, right? But I wanted to then go back and ask you, so everyone in the audience knows what you do. So tell me a bit about your current work and how you got to do what you're currently doing.
I love the segue. It's probably the most natural way to bring it back to the biggest hurdle when it comes to presenting yourself, because I don't know how most people think of the introductions, but it's usually the part that uh, makes me really queasy when I think about it. I'm an email strategist and conversion copywriter, which means that I simply help businesses make more money through their emails. But the important part is not just emails that you send and blast people, but emails that create those connections with the brand so that people can trust you enough, see the value in your product, not just what's in it for me, but actually how does this product can help me transform my life or my business or whatever it is I'm trying to improve, and create an experience that is mindful of all the stages that you go through when you're making a decision, when before you buy anything. And the interesting part out of this is I landed on this whole freelancing journey, which I started almost a decade ago. Um, After studying design, having health issues that prevented me from finishing that, I eventually did, transitioning into explorations of architecture, studying linguistics after turning down architecture, and then realizing that the academia, right at the first year after I was finishing the first year of my bachelor, it wasn't really for me because it was too academic, and I was really yearning for that connection and the psychology of using language and using the language in a way that can help people communicate better. And it all came back full circle to copywriting, which is something I first heard about when I was studying graphic design.
So, from what I understood, you went from starting with design, having some health issues, going a bit into architecture, figuring out that there was some sort of way to communicate what you mentioned, something like the psychology of language, and then that kind of took you to copywriting. Is that correct?
It's correct. I don't know if I mentioned that what I was studying is what I ended up studying is linguistics, because
Hmm.
my brain started racing, so I'm not sure how if I said that out loud or if I was just thinking about it. Um, but yes, and it's mostly, if I have to say one thing about this entire journey, because it sounds very random, but every single thing you pursue when you have an obstacle, let's say the health issue, you start going back to the drawing board, but then turning down one thing and choosing another was mostly, again, a decision based on what is the most reasonable or logical choice at that point in time. And if you realize that you're about to make a decision for the wrong reasons, then that makes everything simpler. Although it doesn't sound like it at all, I think. um, when you stop caring You just let things unfold because you are whole as your own person. And by with this I mean not just personal relationships where a lot of people think that, oh, when they get together with someone or find their one person in life or get married, they will be whole. You are whole as you are as a person. And nobody can fill those gaps that you yourself cannot fill in.
I love when people they don't have like one straight pathway to where they are, because it shows that they are flexible enough to adapt to different situations. Maybe, for example, it could be a health issue or any kind of life issue that shows up, like moving to another country. It's like for instance, I studied biology. I At some point I wanted to be a doctor because wrong reasons, and then I stick to biology, got into IT, and that opened up a lot of things. I did my master's in science teaching, so I always chose things that I got more interest, and I wasn't thinking actually in the end goal what I'll be when I turn when I become an adult, right? Like, when you're grown up, what are you gonna be? I have no idea. I can't even remember what I said when I was a kid when anyone asked for that question, right? And even working with computers, my first computer I had, I was 20 years old. The first computer I had, and I ended up working with web development, software engineering afterwards. So I think the part that you mentioned about having this the health issue, and then that kind of changed the path in the beginning from the design that you had chosen. I think that resonated a lot with me. And earlier on, we were discussing before the recording started, like the experience that we have about living in a different country than the one we're from. So why don't we talk a little about this? Tell me and tell everyone like where you're from and how that moving from your original country to another one
Oh,
impacted your life.
that's even harder because I even grew up in a foreign country. So I didn't even grow up in the country I'm originally from, and I'm from two countries. I'm half Bulgarian, half Russian. I grew up in Greece. I lived there for 17 years before coming to Denmark, and now I have just exceeded that amount by 1 year here in Denmark. So there's a lot of there's a bit of an identity crisis at this stage because for all of the years I've lived in Denmark, I've considered myself to be Greek. But now I guess I should go back to my global citizen identity, which is something I've always gently held on to. So basically, I've lived in Denmark for most of my life for now. I've had a bit of a break through the UK where I studied art and design after the health issue, just which led me to the architecture path, which was a really good experience in terms of opening horizons and experimenting with different things. Even though there's always the little caveat that when you're getting older, you start not to fit in with the people that are supposed to be at that age. And what you said earlier about your personal experience, about your journey, and how you didn't even know what, or you don't remember what you wanted to be when you were a kid, I can totally resonate with that because I think people who know what they want to do right from the very early age, in a way, I've always been a little bit jealous of that because you have something to drive you, and that makes all of the other decisions a lot easier because you have one sole focus. You have one thing that really, really pushes you through, you dream about. Whereas when a lot of different things, when you're drawn to a lot of different things, you're eager to experiment with different things, you tend to feel behind in life, especially as you grow older. when society tells you that by this age you have to get married, you have to have kids, you have to have finished university, college, whatever, however it's called in any part of the world. And that can be stressful, that can be hard to deal with.
It's so true. I think, first of all, like the experience that I had living abroad, it's so much more immense than anything that I had. Like, and I sometimes I pride myself. I have some pride in of saying, "No, I'm Brazilian. I lived in the UK, and then I lived back. I went back to Brazil, and now I live in Canada." And the one thing that you mentioned that I keep thinking is that I lived most of my adult life abroad. And the fact that when I went back to Brazil in 2017, you said, "Oh, we don't fit with the people of our age." And you mentioned like an identity crisis as well, like which nationality you are. It's like I'm a global citizen. It was something that I already noticed when I was living in the UK and I would go back to Brazil. And I would notice that when I talked to my friends back then, it felt like the vast majority of them they stopped in time, and then they were complaining about the same thing that they were complaining when I left. And I was changing so much to a point that it feels like I'm not Brazilian anymore. I wasn't like a Brit in the UK. I always felt like a foreigner. And when I went back to Brazil, my wife and I, when we went back to Brazil, it was like, that's so weird because we don't feel like Brazilians. And then everyone was like, "You guys are weird." I'm like, "Yes." And then we were like, "Okay, probably we have to go somewhere else." And then we came to Canada. We're not Canadians. We're not Brits. We're not necessarily Brazilians anymore. And I realized that not in here was, well, when you move to another country when you're an adult, like, and when I say that, like after your around your 30s 40s, the vast majority of people they already have their friends. So you go to a country without friends, and then everyone else they already have friends, and most of them they're not willing to make more friends, especially nowadays where everything is like through phone, right? But thank God now I have some kids, and then it's easy to make friends with the other parents. And I realized that the circle of friends that I've made, a lot of them they lived abroad. So that was the link that so I found my tribe of somewhat misfits or someone that has experiences. So and maybe that's what made us click as well when we met, right? I think
I don't know if that was what made us click. Maybe only after, or maybe it solidified the click after we got to know each other. Because for me, when I first hear where a person is from, or just by listening to their accent, because that's usually gives me a good indication of the language, since I've studied language and I'm bilingual, trilingual. I don't know what to call myself, but I've always been fascinated by different languages, and I appreciate hearing the diversity around me. And that was something I was missing in Greece, because being a misfit has been my forever identity. I didn't fit there. I tried to fit there. I tried to fit here. And at some point, you just give up because there's no point in fitting anywhere. And the closest I've come to analyze this for myself, because it's been hard making friends as a kid. As a grown up, a little bit less so, because the beauty of growing up and becoming an adult, as you say, which isn't something I've ever actively thought about, to be honest. And I think that's more of a mindset that, or a thinking pattern that I hear a lot from the Western hemisphere, from the US. Canada, UK. Um, when you stop caring, you just let things unfold because you are whole as your own person. And by with this, I mean not just personal relationships where a lot of people think that, oh, when they get together with someone or find their one person in life or get married, they will be whole. You are whole as you are, as a person. And nobody can fill those gaps that you yourself cannot fill in. And until that happens, you will be unhappy, unsatisfied, and just suffer a lot. And we've all had, I think, our own shares of suffering in different lengths or ways or whatever shape or form they may show up in life. But it's interesting because I've noticed that when people start having families, or you know things change after you finish college or university, you get serious the adult way, and then you naturally gravitate towards people who will have the same kind of interests, just like they will have kids, just like what you said. You start meeting other parents and joining these little groups. And that's normal, just as it's normal to return to your own country or to wherever you used to come from, and then realize that suddenly there is a huge gap between you as you are today, the people you knew and you considered friends. But where I would perhaps examine the thought or question it a little bit more, maybe it's not a matter of national identity or feeling Greek enough or Brazilian enough or Portuguese enough or Spanish enough. I don't know, whatever it is that uh, a person may identify or feel inside. But it's more about people growing apart because their journeys are taking them in different ways. And some choose the struggle and the growth, and others, for whatever reason, are feeling stuck. I don't want to say that they choose comfort because there's nothing comfortable in suffering. Maybe it's the pain, but unless you will escape that constrained space and you open up your horizons through travel, through experiencing other cultures, through seeing the world in all its complexities and colors and differences, that's the thing I think that is most missing for a lot of people who may only live to stay in their own country, or who resist anything that's foreign to them or unknown.
Oh my god, so many things that you touched in there. Like, okay, which rabbit hole should we go right now? Because it's the type of conversation that I can only have with someone that has lived at least in one different country. And weirdly enough, we were going to talk more about your work, about how you help your clients in terms of email marketing. But I think this conversation is important because I'm pretty sure that this experience that you have, your personal experience, reflects the path that took you to this career, I would say. May I say a passion that you already kind of like fulfilling. And these may impact the way that you connect with words. So the fact that you pay attention to the pronunciation, so to the different accents, which is something that I always loved when I was back in Brazil learning English and Spanish. I was paying attention to the American accent, which was the most common one that we have in Brazil, and it still is, right? The US has a lot of cultural impact in Brazil. But then I studied in a British kind of school, so I've learned the British accent as well, and I hate it. I'm like, I'll never speak like that. And then suddenly I went there, lived in there, and I picked a lot of stuff. But because I'm a foreigner, I can turn that on up and down if I want to. So my levels of Englishness and Americanness, I can fiddle with that. And when I met a lot of people from different places in the UK. That was the very first time that I'm like, oh my god, there's so many people in the world that we know so little about them and different cultures. So this is something that it added to my life. And at least from my perspective, I apply this today. I'm a business coach, right? And I teach a lot. And teaching was something that I always loved. It doesn't matter if you teach me something, I can be a teacher of that something today as well, because I love to teach whatever I've learned quickly. It's my way of applying what I've learned. And these, I think, these experiences with different cultures, I had to, I became a bit more understanding of different limitations. When I got to the UK, I was a different person because I was still the Brazilian, kind of like trying to push my Brazilian way into other people. And that didn't go well. And I've learned from that experience. Nowadays, I am super more conscious about these differences, these nuances.
Do you mind if I ask what made you change or become conscious of that? That would be a better question, I think.
Well, failing was probably the best teacher. Failing to a point that I became miserable in my work. It was stressful. I remember the most stressful time when I was in the UK was when I migrated. I changed career from being a web developer and becoming a project manager. I didn't know anyone that did that, so I had to figure out by myself by reading books and implementing the change within a company when you are not hired to do that. And people, they know you from one type of expertise, and then suddenly the following day you are a different expert that they know you're not. And then you're trying to implement something that you read in a book. It's hard. And then 6 months later, I got so stressed because things weren't moving as fast as I wanted, and I was being pushy. I kind of like, you know what? Send me back into being a developer. I'm going to be happy. But I saw that all the things that I implemented in there, they were working. And then someone else was hired without experience. And the very first thing that they did was to revert everything that I did back.
Wow.
At that moment, I flipped. And then I'm like, I cannot believe that. And that kind of took me into a weird vibe, to a point that it was around that time that was I was I self identified with Darth Vader.
That's dark.
I know, because I was like, like, come to the dark side, because
Mm.
that was the worst in terms of even my professional behavior. I don't think, right, looking back now, I'm like, oh my god, I would fire myself nowadays immediately for some things that I did. And but I've learned from that. And one of the things which honestly not planned at all is that my boss at that time, he's my friend, and he came and he said, I don't know what how to say that to you, but you need to kind of like control this. And I don't know if you've ever heard of mindfulness and meditation. And at that time we had a client that was kind of like, we were working at an e-learning platform about that. And then in my mind I was so angry. I'm like, oh my god, he's gonna come with this hocus pocus kind of meditation thing. But it was kind of, it was either that or I knew that I was going to be fired. And then I started doing that. 3 months on, using one app that is huge. I'm not gonna talk about that app in here. They're not. It's not sponsoring anything.
It's so interesting because until you mentioned the cultural part last, it didn't even occur to me once that that might be the problem. All I was thinking as I was listening to the story was the situation and the personal dynamics that are going on in a workspace, regardless of the cultural part. Of course, I'm not saying that that may not be a factor, which you mentioned at the end, but it's also very illuminating in the sense that it puts your work into perspective and the things that make you passionate when it comes to helping people, because you see, at least from my point of view, you see what one simple suggestion from your boss at the time, where it led and how it helped shift the entire experience for you in the long run. So now I'm even more appreciative of the fact and the things that you bring to the table when it comes to coaching or teaching, which is something I'm happy that you brought up, because you skipped that when you were talking about your story early on. So
I think only people that lived close to me at that time, they know about this dark side. And a lot of coaches that I follow and I respect, they come from dark places. I was mentioning Dan Martel earlier in our catch up before the recording, and he talks about when he got arrested. So there are lots of them that I think they struggle. They struggle making the mistakes and then figuring out that there is a better way, and then the learning of that struggle, which makes the teachings a bit more meaningful. I see a lot of, okay, this is going to it will probably sound horrible what I'm going to say, but I see a lot of coaches in their 20s that they are reading some stuff, and then they are like, oh, you have to do this, and then they're preaching and everything, and then you see, honestly, we may have a lot of experiences out during school, teenage years, and even during university, but there's something about when you leave this time, and as going back to what something you said, and I'm going to paraphrase you here, it's like when life gets serious, right? That's when you start your life, and then you have the expectations. Now, are you going to get married? Are you going to get that good job? Are you going to have a house? Are you going to buy a house, a car, have kids? Okay. I think that's when I usually say that when I left university was the very first time that I could study whatever I wanted. Nobody was telling me what to study. And that's when I'm like, I can do anything. So that's when I say that my life experiences really started. And going back into being, saying something that will sound pretty bad, is these people that they start coaching and talking about that. Okay, they read in books, and I appreciate that. At least they read it, or at least they say they read it, and then they're kind of putting their own kind of sauce on top of it. But I say, look, you're saying that because you read something. You're talking about meditation. Okay, I know it freaking saved me. I don't teach people, but if they ask me, I'm gonna say this is what happened to me, and this was the effect. Right. Nowadays, I don't meditate as much because I found something else. Okay. But which is not drugs, it's just cold shower and breathing techniques.
well, I was more thinking of breath work. It didn't even occur to me very gladly.
Just saying. Because it's not only you who listen to this. Mom, Dad, I'm all right. Don't worry. It's cold showers helped me a lot too in the
Wim
last
Hof,
years.
Wim Hof stuff.
Wim
Yeah,
Hof
yeah.
stuff. Yeah, exactly. Wim Hof was the one that, like, oh my god, what was that? Okay, but I think they struggle itself, and when I see those struggles and people being transparent about like I made these mistakes and they do not hide, it goes back into what you were saying about like this crisis of like, am I Brazilian? Are you Greek? Are you Russian? Are you no, sorry. You said Bulgarian, right? So I'm like, I don't know what I am. And then I'm like, you're you. And the transparency of like, I was born in Brazil. I live in the UK. I live in Canada. And I've made terrible mistakes. Today I teach a lot of stuff. And some people may say, yeah, hypocrite. You did a lot of weird stuff back then. Yeah. And I learned from that. Right? How many, I'm not saying I'm a hero. Well, I'm a hero of my own story. Yeah. But the greatest story is like the heroes were imperfect, and it wasn't like a straight trajectory. So when I see that in other people that they are teaching, and then they are coaches, for example, or mentors in Brazil, you cannot say that you're a coach because then it's like coach is something fluffy, and then every single coach in Brazil they name themselves mentors. Just linguistic.
There is a big difference, though.
I
One would
know.
say there is a big
Yeah,
difference.
I agree and I understand that. But even the translation of coach from English to Portuguese, it sounds weird. Okay. So that's why. But
Some things you can't really translate. Like for me, growing up, a coach is a basketball coach. I had a basketball coach because I used to play basketball, volleyball. You have it's a similar thing to a trainer. The coaching, the life coaching, the business coaching, all of these things that are that have become popular lately, and all the gurus that have sprung up left and right, that's something you can't really translate as easily. Even though even in the 90s, the big books like the Stephen Covey's, I think, book, the famous books that American authors wrote about. Yeah, I have it somewhere there as well. Um, it was still kind of coaching because they did the business coaching. It was a different format, but it wasn't as popular as it is now. Now that's become a legit business. And I think my personal opinion is that you're a little bit too nice when you're trying not to hurt anyone's feelings about the 20-year-olds. I'm not so nice in that. I'm very nice. I try to be nice, but I'm not nice when it comes to that because I think the biggest value is your experiences that you've been through and the things and the lessons that you've learned. When you see that in other people and you help them either prevent falling into the same traps, or again, going back to the reframing aspect of like the situation that you were describing at the office at the time, how could you have thought about it differently and where could it have led you? Since we're talking about coaches, right? And the type of thinking that goes with coaching. Whereas a mentor is somebody who just tells you what to do because you want to emulate their success and teach me sensei, essentially. So, all of this to say, don't feel bad about calling out the things that are sticking out because you have a very good point. And any person who's invested or wants to learn from someone or have someone help them along the way should be looking at those things and whether or not they connect again with a person and what they have to offer and how they can help them grow. When I say it's a blessing, maybe that's a little bit too light-hearted. For me, it's an opportunity, and maybe that's where I in terms of reframing things. And this is the perfect example actually of what I meant with reframing earlier. You see it as a curse, which as a word, if we analyze that, it's something negative. It's you associate it with something negative that you want to avoid. You have to lift or you have to just remove. Whereas If you see something that can be optimized or improved, that's an opportunity.
Because it's a superpower that you have. You see the things, you smell the bad things, and then you're like, okay, and I have a solution for those.
I think having a filter and a very strong opinion is something I resonate with, and maybe it's why I consciously choose the people I want to surround myself with, whether that's communities or the people that I simply follow and in my mind I consider as mentors, or people I look up to in whatever sphere it is, from life coaching to psychology, whatever it is I'm interested in, art, anything. Because without knowing what you think about something, a topic, it's very hard to form an opinion. But then that opinion that needs to be formed needs to have come through different sources so that you can eventually distill it down to the thing that rings true to you. Because in most cases, I think every person will have little bells, internal bells, that will signal when something is aligned with what they think or they believe in terms of principles. And then the distillation, where the different input sources come in, that's when you start to filter them out. But if you don't know what to believe, or if you don't have an internal compass that can help you, then it gets very hard. And that's something that you build over time, and it's not something you can do from 12 years old until 16 or 18 or 17, unless you're some kind of a genius, which I'd be jealous. But then again, I don't think I would exchange my journey and my life so far, as heartbreaking or painful or hard or difficult or gloriously beautiful and vibrant and sunny it might have been in certain seasons, or tiny glimmers of this journey, because then I wouldn't be the person I am today. And I'm sure that you wouldn't be the person you are today if you hadn't gone through your whole trajectory.
There are some things that came to my mind as you were explaining these in your own words, which was like, for me, it was more like sharpening a knife or a sword, right? You need to have the friction. You need to have that experience of the friction with life, with the hardship. Think about the rock that sharpens the blade. And I think that's kind of like the analogy that came as you were speaking. I'm like, okay, exactly. It's like, if you may read some stuff, cool, but and you may be a genius that somehow you were already sharp from the get-go, which we know it's off the record. It's like, I mean, it's like it's these are some of the outliers, I would say, but still they suffer in a lot of ways, that because they're so sharp, they are blunt in other areas, and then there's also a struggle in there. So whoever is a genius, they have their own kind of like hardships as well, which we may not know much about it. But going back into the coaching, and like, I think that you can only start really teaching when you do have these hardships and you have your own conclusions on things that you've learned, let it be from books or from experiences with other people, with mentors or coaches, right? It's what I call the seasoning. You may have a recipe to do something that can be given by a mentor or can be given by a coach or whatever, right? But the moment that you become a chef is when you kind of like, you can put your own extra ingredients to make that dish yours. And the ones that I say that I can smell from this is the ones that are just vomiting whatever they've heard. And they don't. It's like, if you have a real conversation and you bring a scenario that it's not what the book said, you know that. data that is just memorized, and I'm using that formula and it works. But yeah.
I think all of this falls right into the core of the issue, which is what we started the whole conversation with about connection and people, the epidemic of the lack of connection. Everybody's looking for the easy way out. Everybody's looking for a quick win, a quick buck. And it's just tragic because when you think about it, people eventually stop thinking altogether. And that is even worse because when you cannot, when you no longer are able to think, then what are you supposed to be doing as a human? You outsource the vital activity that you have as a human being to whatever it is available within reach at any point of time.
Which comes down in my mind into the whole usage of AI sometimes for the wrong reasons. Okay, and then we can actually reconnect to what you do, because as I was saying, like if someone is trying to be as efficient, as productive as is, they I had a conversation with Pedro, right? Pedro Ruiz about that, like the way you use the level one usage of AI, it's just for being efficient, and then there are the young people or the season two that they copy paste, like do this, yeah, cool, copy paste, cool, I'm making some money, quick wins, yay, efficient, boom, boom, boom. Everyone else that is not doing is an idiot. I've seen that happening a lot. And now even platforms like LinkedIn, which were great places for you to kind of like have these connections, now it's like you doubt every single thing, if it's really what the person thinks or if it is just AI spitting things. Right? And then even the tricks of like, I'm gonna add a typo here or there, so it's kind of me, but it's not. It's just a copy paste. So
That I didn't even know. That I didn't even occur to me that people would actually do that. But okay,
it does. But what I wanted to go a bit deep right now is kind of like, based on your experiences, what do you think you're bringing to your daily work and to your clients? So all of these things that we discussed, all your experiences, let them be tough ones or great ones, and the insights that you've learned in the way with all these different like design, architecture, linguistics, and everything else, copywriting. What do you think you bring to the table to your clients?
strategic thinking would be my number one. And by that, I mean, I can see the big picture, but I can also see the details. I know what a good experience looks like, whether that's a website, within an email, the whole experience that somebody goes through, all the screens that they see when they're interacting with an app. And I know where things break down because they're either not thought out very well, they miss specific points, they lead to frustration. Because as a user, everything I experience myself, I always make a note. I have like a I have a visual library that where I save everything. That's just it goes with the job. Every copywriter has swipes, as they call them, for copy, but I keep one for visuals, and that's also something I draw from when I teach other copywriters design, just so they can catch those details and see them instead of just being someone who's churning out words and not seeing the same kind of big picture of everything where that copy is going to live on a page or in an email. So, strategic thinking would be the first and foremost part, I would say. And that's why I'm so big on the thinking part, because this is not something you outsource to AI. For me, at least, the way I've been using it and exploring it is more in terms of ideation, in terms of cleanup or just light editing stuff, but not outsourcing my thinking to a language model. And then, of course, I know Pedro from the interview that you had. He has a very positive outlook, which I really like. But as a natural skeptic, where I always look for the thing that might be misunderstood, or and that's probably something I'm bringing with from design, because everything in visual design, you have to make sure that there is nothing there that could lead to unwanted representations, visual ones, or connections that would be very, very bad for a brand. And I'm not going to go into that, but because I think it makes sense with all the logos and different things that people have designed over time and where it's led. Um, but I am excited to see how all the other more advanced AI things that I haven't yet gotten to explore, like agentic workflows, or how to automate things that could free up more time for me to do that high level thinking that I really, really enjoy, and looking at the whole experience and then diving into the more specific parts of it.
I think there was one thing that I discussed with Pedro, and which is something that I've been using a lot. So I use AI a lot, all the time, to think, not necessarily to give me the results, right? Which is kind of the level one. Like, give me this. I need this. Give me, right? Easy. Nowadays, like, even like with my team, or like things that would take forever. I need some documentation about this. Well, 5 seconds later, here is the documentation. I created it all. I'm like, and then the way that I like to use nowadays is more like the helping me think and connecting ideas that I read in different sorts of books, and I may be creating my own parallels. And I say, is there like sometimes I do that. It's like, is there a parallel in here and there? And then sometimes I am super into the different kind of coaches, business coaches, or any kind of like anyone that talks about art, creativity, and business. I get attracted to, because these are things that influence a lot what I do and the way that I like to help people nowadays. So I can see now patterns, and then I try to figure out there seems to be a pattern in here, and then I kind of like start asking questions. This, that's it. There seems to be a pattern in here. Is this something? Am I imagining some stuff? Sometimes I use my own GPTs to kind of like do that. Although there is like a from my project from my product management experience, which touches a lot of UX that you were mentioning, I've learned a lot about biases, social psychology, and UX in that sense. So I am always trying to pay attention to not ask leading questions to AI as well when it comes down to the thoughts that I'm having. So sometimes I ask surrounding questions to a point that I'm like, do I see any parallel in here? And then I don't say what I see, and then like, boom, the AI comes and like, there is a parallel here, here, here because of this idea, and then maybe they name it differently, but it's basically the same thing in different frameworks. And there's something else that you were talking about the UX and the design, how people perceive it. I thought directly like Photoshop failures. That was the very first thing that I saw so many. But there is one thing that I've learned from the first guy, the CEO who hired me in my first startup in the US. he told me something about UX that then I gave it a name afterwards. But he said, like, once you learn about UX, you start looking at UX everywhere. So I was learning, I was applying the UX inside a software. And he said, but the thing is, UX is everywhere. So he told me a story about of going to a Starbucks shop, and then the whole staff, they were looking after the people from the drive-through. He's like, I was there waiting for someone to come and take my order, but they were all there. He's like, I wrote to the owner just complaining about it. That's bad UX. And since then, I see everywhere. And even when I'm coaching, when I'm teaching, when I'm talking to giving training to my team, I talk about that. UX is everywhere. So you have the client experience. It's UX. It's not because we got them as a new client. Everything counts. And because I talked about that, one of the guys that used to work with in my team, in my agency, he gave me a book that is oh my God, the name is Unreasonable Hospitality. And he said, that is exactly what you're trying to implement here in the company. And as soon as you start saying about the UX that you want, the client experience that you want, he's like, that's it. And I read it, I'm like, oh my God, that's literally UX applied to restaurants. Right? That's what the book talks about. And the way I see is that what you what you bring to the table is all this holistic experience that you had that then you're applying into the copy of the strategy and the copy that you kind of bring to your clients. Is that fair to say?
It's very fair, and it's also the part where I've always felt unclear in terms of where I actually fall on the copywriter, email marketer, marketing strategist. Like, because I've done work across the funnel since I started, I've just decided uh, a few years ago to focus on email because you have more control and you have immediate results and you can see things without having to wait for months or years until a website gets implemented. And it's just, it gives you more control. And for someone who likes to look at things from high above and then also go in, it's just, it's perfect. But I've always struggled to keep myself confined under one title, like copywriter, or even the email strategist part. I still go into UX because I naturally cannot look at one thing without looking at everything else, because nothing exists in isolation. Nothing is on its own in its own little neat bubble where nobody can actually poke at it and let it burst. Everything is interconnected. From the moment somebody lands on the website, and let's say they have to sign up for, I'll give an e-commerce brand because that's a lot simpler for most people to grasp. But we could go with a SaaS solution as well. Like if you sign up for a trial, like what kind of emails you get, what kind of experience do you have with the website? How does the in-app experience, if it's a desktop solution, work? If it's a mobile, most brands don't even send you any emails. Like, it's only within your mobile. So if you want to try and meditate, and you may never even hear from that brand ever again unless you've actually taken up their pay trial or whatever it is. And even then, and I'm saying that because I test things all the time. I'm religiously save screenshots just so I can have something to analyze and break down, because everything is an opportunity to optimize. There is nothing that you can do today and leave it for 10 years without even touching it because it works so well and it converts well and you have so much revenue coming in. That's the whole part of conversion copywriting as I learned it from Joanna Wiebe, from Copy Hackers. She's the person who coined the whole term where everybody started to adopt it and call themselves a conversion copywriter, myself included. I've learned under her. So a lot of these things about UX also she talked about early on when I was honing my craft and learning the craft of copywriting. After having gone through direct response textbooks and all the heavier parts that didn't really resonate because the missing point was the UX, but you could still see those little glimpses of the importance of the experience and how it should all tie together. So it's impossible to just say, I am only looking at the headlines and nothing else. But then again, my path and my journey has been a lot different, and I have maybe an advantage of that I started with design. So it's something that naturally I bring into anything. A lot of copywriters who don't have that or haven't had that sort of trajectory, and they're more they have a bigger affinity to words, and that's where they excel at, then it might lead to friction because at some point when they have to present their copy and you cannot fit that into the visual part or the packaging that it should be um, presented in, that's when I realized that this is something I could actually help people with because I speak both languages and in quotation marks. And I know that this brings a lot of value to my clients because when they hire me and they work with me, they're not just getting one person for one job, but I'm looking at their best interest and the best interest of the person we are trying to speak to, and just bringing it all together, including their teams and everything else that comes into this whole ecosystem that a business is essentially.
There are two things that you mentioned. Like one of them is the job title. I don't fit in one. That's why we have so many. What one of my Brazilian mentors, she said, you are a slash professional. I'm like, what is that? She's like, it's that person that has like, I am a biologist slash this slash that because you cannot fit in one job title. And since then, I've been bashing everyone about their job titles because sometimes when I say like, who are you? I am a web developer. And I'm like, are you a web developer? Is your job title your definition of you? And and the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the the term that I use, the curse of UX, which you are definitely infected by, because as I said, once you see UX everywhere, it's a curse. Right?
I think
Just like, go
I
ahead,
think it's a
it's a good
blessing.
curse.
I think it's a blessing. It's not a curse for me.
I think it's a blessing because you interpret that, and but the thing is that you see bad UX, and that's where I think it's a curse, because it's just like when someone says, have you ever noticed that that person, they do this when they are something like that I remember watching How I Met Your Mother, and there is an episode that talks all about that. They even use like a crashing, a window crashing sound. Have you ever noticed that he always literally, no, it's figuratively, he always gives a speech that. So I think that's, and there is one book that I love, the non-designer's design book from Robin Williams, and she mentions that in a different context, that she's like, she got a book about some trees, and then she started seeing, she read about the Joshua tree, and she's like, after I read about it, I started walking my neighborhood, and there was Joshua trees everywhere. They were always there, but I never seen it. And that's kind of what I say about a curse. It's a blessing because now I see I was ignorant of that problem or of that fact that was all around me. But when you see bad UX, it's a curse because then you kind of, ignorance is bliss sometimes if you don't have the control of fixing.
I really love that you're expressing that in that way because it instantly makes me want to argue in a very hopefully thoughtful way. Because when I say it's a blessing, maybe that's a little bit too light-hearted. For me, it's an opportunity, and maybe that's where I in terms of reframing things, and this is the perfect example actually of what I meant with reframing earlier. You see it as a curse, which as a word, if we analyze that, it's something negative. It's you associate it with something negative that you want to avoid. You have to lift, or you have to just remove. Whereas if you see something that can be optimized or improved, that's an opportunity. It's a gap is could be also considered negative as a word, but the opportunity part is you can it starts making your brain think of ways to improve this. The doctor's experience, the most frustrating things out of all the experiences that you could ever have, unless you've been blessed with a good healthcare system, which I don't know which country in the world has that at this point. But out of the frustration and out of all the annoyances that come with that kind of experience, you just immediately, when you're framing it as what can I do to make this better, what can I do to turn my experience and flip it around in a way that in a similar scenario, be it digital or when you buy something online, when you purchase a course, or when you have a membership that you just signed up for, how can I make it so that the person who signs up doesn't have to experience a similar thing in this particular context?
I don't disagree with you. I think you're a step ahead of the curse thing
Mhm.
that I mentioned. The curse is like observing the bad thing when you do not have the power to change it, or it the power to change it. It's arguably like I can go and get involved in that in there. It's like, but does it make sense,
Mhm.
right, to me in a business perspective? I think it becomes a blessing because it's a superpower that you have. You see the things, you smell the bad things, and then you're like, okay, and I have a solution for those. Right? I think and that goes back into the job titles that you said. Why do you have these superpowers? It's because you didn't have a one straight trajectory, and that's why like the specialists themselves, they cannot see everything from the angle that it came. Like that's why like whenever I interview some people and then I see that they jumped from one place to the other from different experiences, some people they say, oh, this person is not focused. For me, it's a feature, not a bug for most of the things. Unless I need a specialist, for example, in video editing, they've been doing video editing, and then I need that person to do only video editing. Okay, I'm gonna go for that. But even if I need that, and the vast majority they did video editing, but they did some weird stuff before, I like to interview that person, right? Why? Because it gives a different perspective. So you see that the person is not rigid in terms of I'm focused, I'm like just efficient in this, which I've worked with, especially software engineers, that it was their religion. And then if you try to think anything outside of the box, it was like my worst professional experiences were with this kind of engineers, right? Worse than when I was Darth Vader,
I
right?
can imagine that without any issues,
Yeah.
for sure.
You probably have some experiences around that.
Not personal, but I have someone who's very close to me, my partner, who he is exactly in this field, so I know a lot about that, and I understand perfectly.
Yeah, no, I picked massive fights with some people, right? With technical people, and I come from a technical side too, but because I have a different point of view as well, like, no, that's not efficient. And even like, oh, you're efficiently going to the wrong side, but it's efficient. But
I hear that on a daily basis from the same person as well when it comes to efficiency. So it's painfully familiar. You know how hard that is, though, for the person. I don't know how most people are, but for somebody who is very aware and self conscious in a way and deeply feeling the constant improvement, the need to constantly improve. Like if that's a lifelong journey, when you're on that, it's very hard for you to say, okay, I've made it. I'm here. I know enough. It's never enough. Like you can trust your skills to a point where you know that you can do your job well. You know that your clients will appreciate what you have to offer, but then you don't stop there. And that's, I think, the whole point with constant improvement, but it's also very personal. And out of everything you've said about specialists and job titles, which is so hard to condense yourself under one 2 word phrase and just try to communicate something that you do so that people get it. But it also made me wonder how you'd feel if I asked you what do you think about being called an expert. Because going back to the 20-year-olds, these days, I think everybody considers themselves an expert in something. And I was very aware of the fact that you did not say that word and you instead chose the word specialist, which is a little bit milder. And it still communicates the fact that you have specialized in something, you have chosen to work with that particular area of the bigger pie, let's say digital marketing, social media strategy. That's more specific because then I know if I hire you to do my social media strategy, you're going to come up with a good plan so that I don't get crazy or wonder where my growth is, which you promised, compared to digital strategy, which is all over the place. So, what is your take on being an expert? How do you feel about that?
I like to think that Tim Ferriss mentioned a term that it's the generalist specialist. This is where you should kind of be, where you do have like one area where you're really a specialist, an expert almost, but then you start studying areas around it, which is literally what kind of like unrelated in possibly in an unplanned way you ended up with, right? And in some ways I did that too, in terms of and that's the weird thing, for it was by accident in some parts. Later in my life it was by design, but I studied biology first because I loved it. So I've learned the whole concept of science and like the scientific method, which some people don't believe in, but I do. And then figuring out how you do that in a way that you rely on the data, you do it in a way that is replicable. And then I ended up doing coding. I thought about being efficient as well. The code is my religion. So everything that I complain about people, I've done it. Don't get me wrong. I think that I give myself the right to complain because I've done it and I've learned to pass beyond these mistakes. But then I realized that as I was coding, I studied design because I knew that the clashes between developers and designers was in there. And I recall, and I told this story to many times, is that I recall the day when I was coding the website and we were working with a print designer doing web design. In print design, if something, you probably know that, like if something is like 1 millimeter out, misaligned, it's trouble. When we talk about web, it's fluid, like, yeah. And then I remember the guy saying, hey, the designer came, I was in front of my computer, he came here, he's like, oh, that thing is 3 pixels out. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? Like, he's like, yeah, it's misaligned. I'm like, no, it's not. Then he went to his desk. He got his ruler. He put it in my screen. On top of it, he's like, you see, it's misaligned and it's 3 pixels. Then I hated that guy. Actually, today I really appreciate what he did and I don't hate him. But at that moment, I hated him, right? Because he was that specialist and I wasn't, because it was his design. And then I said, I should study this. Right. I am a specialist in the coding. I am the expert in here. He's the expert in there. And then I said, what if I study? That's when I actually got the book that I was talking about, the non-designer's design book. And then I realized that I don't have to be a designer. But because I was someone that understood coding pretty well, I thought I was awesome back then, to be honest. Again, silly me. I had some wake up calls, but chat for another day. But when I realized that if I studied that, then I could be even more of a specialist expert in there. But I think going back to your original, like what I think about what you mentioned about being an expert specialist, I think there is a moment that we kind of define the things that we like and then we go. But if your journey was always kind of something straight, but I get someone that has more experience and then they decide to focus on something, they're way two different professionals. Even though this one has studied only that thing, they may know the peculiarity of the I can almost bet that that person will be more inflexible. And in one thing that another guest, Julio, said is that like, the only constant is it's the change in life, right? So whenever I worked with specialists that they were really inflexible, it was problematic. So you can choose to be a specialist after working with many things, and that it was a decision, as I said, by design. I decided to focus on business. Biologist, like coder, half designer, product manager, project manager. I'm learning about finance. And I'm like, look, it doesn't matter which business I go to, I can help them, and I can see from an outsider's perspective and more holistic kind of point of view, which it's the way that you kind of described without using that word. But the thing is that if I have to choose to be a specialist, it's going to be something by design, and you cannot be that specialist before your 30s. It's really hard. You didn't have enough experiences. That's my bias and my
I
opinion.
agree. I agree. Which explains also the 20-year-old coaching um, experts that you mentioned early on. And it beautifully ties to that. What's surprising is that these days we talk about or we worry so much about expertise and who's a specialist, who's a generalist, when if we look back at the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, he had mastered so many things. And I don't know, that's impressive for me. That's the ultimate purpose in life, to package up as much as you have available to you in terms of your little time boxes and absorb as much as you can possibly put inside this journey that you're on, instead of picking only one and losing out of everything else that life has to offer, all these different fields, because they shape you. Like everything you've been through, even though it sounds mind blowing to think that you've been through a biology track and then you ended up with web development and then managing your agency and coaching people and teaching and all of that. But it brings you an edge, just like the sword uh, sharpening process. It brings you an edge that very few people could have. And that's a massive strength. And when it comes to the competitive advantage, which is very often talked about, especially in copywriting, and when you start to work with companies and try to take that messaging and polish it up and bring out what the company actually does, that's the personal competitive advantage that you have.
Different experiences that put you in there. And I want to go back into one thing that you mentioned that I didn't dive into, but I want to right now, which I think, I know we are like going like really far in terms of time as well. I want to be mindful of your time as well. But you mentioned about like learning, right? Keeping improving. There's no way. And that comes down to where and when in time we met, which was about sales. So tell me more. Why did you decide, just from a different way from my decision to go there as well? Why did you decide to go into a call with Chris, though, right? And be selected to be in front of the whole LinkedIn network, and with Jewel as well, to be roasted, literally roasted in front of everyone, to practice and learn more about sales.
I think it comes down to the pain of a pounding heart when you're on those calls with clients, because no matter how well I know what I do, and no matter how convinced I am I can help, I still get nervous on those calls. And it's not the excitement kind of nervous that people tell you to say, "Oh, I feel excited." And that's probably a reframe that you tell yourself just so you can have more courage. But it is a nervous experience. The reason I joined is because I see the gap, I see the opportunity. It's Chris Do, it's Joel, two amazing people. Of course, if I have the opportunity, I'm just gonna do what I learned from my coaches early on. Say yes, think about it later. And as someone who overthinks everything, because I've heard people tell me it's I think I think it was someone from the pro group last year when I was expressing something like that, and they told me that you care too much, or you care about how it's going to how you're going to look, or it's going to sound, or what you're going to do. And there's no the pain of staying the same compared to the pain or discomfort that I might feel for a while on that call, which I honestly didn't feel so nervous. I didn't even think about LinkedIn. I didn't think about the people in the Zoom room. I didn't really care. I was just there because it's different when you are in a room where you have an opportunity with someone you've watched from your home on YouTube, learning so much about brand strategy. Chris is a person who's helped me, and Melinda Livesey, because I was consuming all the playlist with brand strategy while I was working with client work, and I was just really eager to improve my process and just again fill those gaps that I was noticing with the clients I was working with. They were missing something which was brand strategy related. It wasn't branding, it wasn't, just to hone that. So that's why I absorbed everything, and I've learned so much. So it was surreal to me that I was on that call, but at the same time, the moment it was happening, and that's where we first met, I was just in the moment. It was just that kind of mindfulness. I accept it. I'm here. I will make the most out of it, not in a sense of patting myself on the back, or just focusing enough so that I don't have my brain take over and overthink and feel the whole nervous vibes that usually come out when you get stuck inside. So it was instant, um it was constant improvement in action. A long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's good. As I that goes into the whole point of like keep learning, right? The more you learn, you have to keep learning harder things, things that take you out of your comfort zone. Otherwise, you get to the point that it says like I've learned enough. That's good, which is the worst place you could be in your life.
If you don't move forward, where are you going? You either stay stuck or you go back. Both of these options are painful, but the most painful one I think is being stuck. When you don't feel growth, or when you don't feel you have opportunities to expand, to reach higher, then what are you doing? It doesn't have to be, and I'm not, I hope this doesn't come across as um, aggressive in a way that it's the type of push mentality that a lot of people have, or go for more money, more power, more anything. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about your personal vision of what growth means to you as a person, and to you by being any single person who would listen to this podcast at any point of time, and then reaching higher and aiming for the best, the better, the thing that will take you on that next level, your personal next level. Because even if you and I lived the same kind of lives, if we went through the same things, there's no way we would have the same experiences. Fundamentally, we are different people. We experience things different in different ways. The experiences may be the same, but how we perceive them will be so different because we have different personalities, we have different principles, beliefs, whatever it is. And that's the beauty of it.
Riley, thank you so much for this conversation. And for anyone that wants to know more about you, that want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
The easiest part would be LinkedIn, Relitsa Minkova. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but you will probably see me. My picture is there. You cannot not see me when you search for that. It's been an absolute pleasure, Leslie. I think it's very rare to have these kind of conversations on a podcast, and I really, really appreciate you having me on today. I massively enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it too.